everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com here with what happened at NXT UK TakeOver Blackpool. A very eventful show, a show that I think was better than I expected actually. That's not to say that I don't, that I'm doubting the talent of all the guys on the show. Obviously this is some of the best talent in the UK wrestling scene right now, but at the same time I thought the build on NXT UK may have been a little bit weak in certain places, maybe some matches had less hype than others, that sort of thing. But I think in the end the show delivered on a level slightly more than I imagined. Not much more. I thought that I was still thinking these matches are going to be pretty good across the board, but I think some actually exceeded my expectations as well. So a huge congratulations to everybody. A massively significant event for NXT UK, of course, and hopefully the good sign of things to come in the future. So without any further ado, let's take a look at everything that happened at NXT UK TakeOver Blackpool. Got the name right, got it in one. So we start things off with the big tag team title match between Moustache Mountain, Trent Seven and Tyler Bate against grizzled young veterans, the team of Zack Gibson, Liverpool's #1, and James Drake. This was a really good choice to open the show, I think. Personally, this was my favourite match of the entire night, straight off the bat, and the crowd were really hot. The story of the early goings was definitely how passionate and how intense, and maybe how a little bit drunk the crowd were. It was a really hot crowd in Blackpool, living up to the stereotype, I guess, of UK crowds loving a chant, loving to make noise, and really getting behind the wrestlers, giving the reactions that any wrestler I think would want in that position. They cheered the faces, booed the heels, did everything by the book, but in that over-the-top, intense, passionate British way. It was a joy to watch, and even though at some points of the night the crowd's enthusiasm may have dipped slightly, in this opening tag match especially, the energy levels were really off the charts. As I mentioned, this was a really good match, and the fact that it was for the vacant tag team titles to decide the first ever champions really kept everyone guessing all the way throughout. There were various false finishes. Tyler and Trent continued to be two of the best wrestlers in the world at selling the impact of a submission hold. It looked at various stages like they were going to tap out, especially when they were trapped in twin Shankly gates, and it looked especially like Trent Seven was going to tap out, but then Tyler Bate scooped up James Drake, dropped him onto the pair in the submission hold. That was a really cool near fall, I guess it counts as, near submission victory. The match progressed, and eventually it was actually the heels who got the victory. James Drake and Zack Gibson are the first ever NXT UK Tag Team Champions, a result that surprised me. I thought the Moustache Mountain would win, but I can't fault WWE for putting the belts on the heels because they are an excellent tag team, and especially Zack Gibson, they're an excellent pair of heels. Zack Gibson is one of the purest and best heels, in my opinion, in the entire wrestling business. It was also nice to see Moustache Mountain paying homage to the British Bulldogs, one of the most legendary tag teams ever, and probably the most legendary tag team in British wrestling history, certainly. I was a bit confused by the colour scheme and the flags they brought out. Apparently those were Black Country flags, the area of the UK that both Trent and Tyler are from. That was a nice touch. I think they hit some signature moves from the British Bulldog and Dynamite Kid as well later on in the match towards the end. And when that happened, it looked like all the momentum was with the babyfaces and that they were going to win. But then there was a wicked spot where Tyler Bate was on the shoulders on the outside, and I think it was James Drake who ducked a Rainmaker sort of 5-star lariat from Trent Seven, hit the ropes, ran out the other side, huge dive onto Tyler Bate, who thankfully managed to get the full rotation off the back of Zack Gibson's shoulders and not land on his neck. That was a really cool spot, and eventually, yeah, the heels picked up the big victory with their double team finisher. Yeah, as I say, this was my favourite match of the night, and now let's move on to the rest of the matches, because there was a little bit of a surprise coming up next. So next up, it was Jordan Devlin versus Travis Banks. The story being that Jordan Devlin, the heel in this feud, had jumped the babyface Travis Banks earlier on in the day and had injured his leg. Travis Banks bravely came out and actually attacked Jordan Devlin straight off the bat with a suicide dive as Devlin was making his entrance, but then Devlin targeted the weakened leg even before the bell had rang and sort of got the match thrown out before it had even started. This brought out Johnny Saint and his vice general manager kind of position, Sid Scala, who announced that they had a backup in mind because they thought that because Jordan Devlin's really unscrupulous and a dastardly heel, that something like this would happen. So they had a replacement for Travis Banks in position, and that man was Finn Bálor. I'm not really sure what to make of this. Yes, it was very exciting, and yes, it was great for the NXT UK brand to have a mega star from the main roster in Finn Bálor on their show. At the same time, for Jordan Devlin, I'm not sure if this would have worked out particularly well. As we all know, since Jordan Devlin started in NXT UK, or even in those UK tournaments beforehand, everyone was comparing him to Finn Bálor. Some kind of unfair things were said about him, like he's just a budget Finn Bálor, he's not as good as Finn Bálor, and that's really unfair because Jordan Devlin is a fantastic wrestler in his own right. He has unbelievable techers, as the kids say. And yes, when this happened, immediately on Twitter, everyone, including myself, I was guilty of making a joke. Everyone was making a joke like, oh my god, it's Finn Bálor and Jordan Devlin. They're both really similar because they're both Irish. They kind of look the same. They wrestle sort of in a similar style, although I think you can, by watching them, you can distinguish between the two. And I believe that Bálor actually also had a hand in training Devlin as well. But this panned out to be a really, really good match. It was really good. I thought that Jordan Devlin probably should have picked up the victory, but at the same time, it was kind of a lose-lose situation in terms of booking, just because if Bálor had lost, that would have been a huge loss for him, and he's losing enough on the main roster on Raw anyway. Whereas with Devlin losing to Bálor, he doesn't lose too much, I guess, just because Bálor's a main roster star. Devlin's on NXT UK. It doesn't damage him that much. At the same time, it did bring up all those comparisons once again, and to have him lose to Finn Bálor in that way, I'm wondering if it'll bring some of that back and kind of take away from the organic momentum that Devlin has generated for himself. At the same time though, you can't doubt that this was a really, really good match. Both guys are phenomenal professional wrestlers. And also, it wasn't a squash by any means. Devlin came close, there were a lot of near falls, but eventually it was just too much to handle. Finn Bálor got the win with the coup de grace off the top rope and picked up a big victory on NXT UK. After this match, which was really good, on that blistering opening tag match, this show got off to a really, really hot start. Could it maintain it? Not quite, but the level of quality didn't dip too much, I will say that. Next up, and I should mention before we move on that Luke Menzies was shown in the crowd. He's obviously part of the NXT's main US brand. I'm wondering if this means he's going to move to NXT UK, I don't know. Sam made a good point saying I hope he doesn't, because, you know, it's probably quite unique to have a British guy in NXT over in America, just like Danny Burch as well, who's doing a fantastic job as the tag partner of Oney Lorcan. Anyway, moving on to the next match, it was that no DQ match between Eddie Dennis and Dave Mastiff. At the time while I was watching this, I thought this match was really cool. It was hard hitting, there were painful spots taken by both guys, painful bumps taken by both guys as well. But looking back, I can't remember too much of it. I think out of all the matches on this card, this one, Eddie Dennis versus Dave Mastiff, risked being lost in the shuffle a little bit, despite its no DQ stipulation. With that said, the use of weapons was really satisfying. I'm glad that they put a sort of hardcore stipulation on the show, just to sort of keep it separate from all the other straight singles or tag matches on the card. And I enjoyed the finish as well. Dave Mastiff slamming Eddie Dennis through a table in the corner en route to picking up a big victory. It was a big babyface victory. Everyone was like, yes, Dave Mastiff has won. I'd have personally preferred it if Eddie Dennis had won, just because I love him as a promo guy. I think he's one of the best promos in the world of wrestling right now. But at the same time, I think on this sort of show, you needed kind of a big hurrah, big babyface victory. That's not to say that babyfaces didn't win elsewhere, such as Bálor and maybe the matches we're going to look at in a second, but I think it was nice to see. This match for me, especially with the no DQ stipulation, was nailed on for an Eddie Dennis victory, maybe in slightly devious circumstances. So I think it was cool to see Dave Mastiff, the good guy, come through, the good guy, like he's a big old school babyface. He's not, but he was the babyface in this feud, and it was good to see him come through with just a big powerhouse victory over not a bigger guy, but a taller guy. And I think it was pretty satisfying. One of the most satisfying results on the show, even if, as I say, it did get a little bit lost in the shuffle. Next up, it was the women's title match, but just before that, we saw a couple of very interesting faces in the crowd. Kaylee Ray and Jazzy Gabbert, I think. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her surname. The alpha female. She really impressed in the first Mae Young Classic, I believe, and was one of like the big dominating powerhouses of the tournament before she was eliminated, if I remember rightly, by Kimberly, I think, but I'm not quite certain on that. Anyway, it was great to see her in the crowd, especially because she had some injury troubles as of late. Great to see her back in contention. I think she'll be an excellent part of the NXT UK brand, as will Kaylee Ray. I was surprised not to see Viper though, given the rumours that she was going to join as well, and I really hope she does. She's one of my favourite wrestlers, and not just women's wrestlers, she's one of my favourite wrestlers in the world. I think she's fantastic, and I think if she was to join the NXT UK division, she would certainly be a future women's champion. Now on to the match, Rhea Ripley, the champion, defending against Toni Storm. For me, watching this again, it was another one that I predicted wrong. I thought this was going to be just a flat-out Rhea Ripley victory, because even though she's been portrayed as this dominating figure, she hasn't actually held the belt for that long, not long enough to really back up her words and her actions. as this dominating figure. She's, you know, she walks the walk and she jumps people and cuts heelish promos, but she hasn't quite talked the talk yet. I said walk the walk before, you know what I mean. With that said, this match was a good one. Toni Storm delivered maybe the best babyface performance of the night. She looked really emotional, trying to get the crowd to carry her through to a big victory over Rhea Ripley. But all the way through I thought, yeah, but Rhea Ripley's going to win anyway. I think they kicked out of each other's finishes, and eventually Toni Storm hit a second Storm Zero, or Strong Zero as it's called on the indies or outside of WWE, and picked up the big surprise victory, I think. I don't think Rhea Ripley's held the belt for that long, and I was really surprised that WWE have moved her on to another wrestler already. For me, this kind of seems a little bit like Toni Storm was always their girl, always the person they envisioned leading the women's division in the UK. Maybe Rhea Ripley was just not a placeholder, that sounds harsh, but just kind of the first champion, and now that her reign's out of the way, Toni Storm can really enjoy a long babyface run with the belt. However, with that said, Rhea Ripley really held up her end of the bargain in this match. She dominated the opening stages. Toni Storm got very little offense in until she made her big comeback towards the end. She was hitting big headbutts. She was hitting power moves on a much bigger woman. It was really good to watch. I enjoyed the match. Not quite as good as the opening tag for me, but still a very enjoyable title match and a huge emotional victory for Toni Storm, celebrating with the crowd at the end, and I think maybe one of the biggest pops of the night. And finally, we had the main event of the night, the NXT UK Championship match between Pete Dunne, the most dominating champion of the modern era, against Joe Coffey, the man who many people, including myself, had pegged to beat him for that title. This match, right, I've got mixed feelings. For the most part, it was excellent. A really, really good match between two of the best wrestlers in the UK, particularly Pete Dunne, who is just on another level. It surely won't be long before we see him either in the main NXT brand over in the US or even on the main roster. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see him enter the Royal Rumble at the end of the month. But this match was good for the most part. It was very long though, and I think this will probably divide opinion. I think some people probably enjoyed its length. Some others, maybe myself included, thought it could have been cut a little bit shorter. They went for the epic feel, and in some spots they really totally got it. There were crowd chants of, "Are you watching Vince McMahon?" at certain stages. They were like beating the count at various points, like double count out fake spots and that sort of thing. Load of good moves by the guys as well, back and forth exchanges, that sort of thing. I enjoyed the fact that Joe Coffey sent Mark Coffey and Wolfgang to the back before the match began. During his entrance, they sort of went, "Yep, you've got this, Joe, off you go." I think that really helped add to the prestige of the match. I wouldn't have enjoyed seeing a screwy sort of heel-influenced finish towards the end of this. It really built to an epic conclusion, and then there was a big botch off the top rope where Joe Coffey had his big heelish moment of triumph where he was like, "This is my kingdom." And I think they were supposed to both tumble off the edge and hit their heads on the crowd barrier, but instead Joe fell backwards prematurely and took a nasty spill to the outside. I hope he's okay. Pete Dunne fell backwards into the ring, and I'm pretty sure this was a botch just because Joe Coffey looked annoyed on the outside. Pete Dunne got out the ring, grabbed him in a headlock, and you could see them kind of communicating with each other what to do next. What they did next, I personally, and I'm not a professional wrestler, so obviously take this with a grain of salt, but I disagreed with. I don't think they should have repeated the spot. They did. They both flew to the outside this time, took a double head bump thing off the guardrail, and then rolled back in the ring and the match continued. If this had been integral to the finish, I could understand repeating the spot, but the fact that it wasn't part of the finishing sequence made me think sort of twice about it. Nevertheless, it was a really good match. I enjoyed the way this ramped up throughout. I wouldn't quite say it was 5 stars, as some people were saying in a live stream chat, but I still think it was really, really good, and certainly a worthy title match for this belt that Pete Dunne has kept a hold of for like 2 years now, and really helped elevate the prestige of over the months and months that he's held it. I enjoyed that they kicked out of each other's finishes. They hit the finishes multiple times. One bit that I really liked was the second bitter end that Pete Dunne hit when Joe Coffey rolled out the way of the pinfall. It was kind of smart. It was like, I'm too weak to kick out, so I'll just avoid the cover in the first place. I think Joe Coffey hit the bitter end as well, stealing Pete Dunne's finisher. I'm pretty sure that happened, but I can't quite remember. There was a lot of stuff in this match. The finish came when Dunne hit a third bitter end, made the cover. Joe Coffey kicked out, making him look really strong, but then Pete Dunne grabbed the fingers, went to manipulate them and try and break the fingers, and Joe Coffey just tapped out. We don't often see submission victories for Pete Dunne when he uses the finger spot, but I thought it was pretty good. It really got over his finger sort of joint manipulation as a key part of his moveset, so I didn't mind that. Pete Dunne retaining the title, which I found very surprising. I thought Coffey was the guy to finally take it from him, and Pete Dunne celebrated in front of a raucous grateful crowd. And it wasn't over yet. Just as sort of the signature popped up in true NXT fashion, you know that things might not necessarily be all said and done yet. And it wasn't, as Walter's music hit and he strode out onto the ramp and got into the ring and did his whole hands behind the back pose. The crowd were going wild for Walter. Pete Dunne stood up to him, they got in each other's face. Joe Coffey tried to get back in the ring to gain a measure of revenge, but Walter just kicked him. He took another spill to the outside. Great job by Joe Coffey, by the way. Really selfless job of putting the other guys over in the ring. And they squared up against each other, and I cannot wait for Pete Dunne versus Walter. I think we've finally got the identity of the man who's going to end Pete Dunne's mammoth run. But even if he doesn't, that's going to be one hell of a match. Maybe a 5-star match. And I'm going to say it's probably my favourite to be the first real, true, classic match of NXT's UK division. If we're not counting Pete Dunne versus Tyler Bate, of course, at NXT TakeOver Chicago 1. But since NXT UK has been established, I think Dunne versus Walter is very, very much where it's at. And it's already one of my most anticipated matches of 2019. So thank you very much for watching. Excuse my slightly croaky voice, it still hasn't fully recovered from Tokyo yet. But yes, that is what happened at NXT UK TakeOver Blackpool. Thank you very much once again. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to, at Jack the Jobber. You can follow all of us at Cultaholic, and check out our Patreon too, patreon.com/Cultaholic. And never forget, of course, if you haven't done so already, to hit subscribe and to join us.